Hey guys, how are we today? So, as you can see from my last video, I talked about this reaccumulation just before the FOMC being a potential long trade opportunity. Now, unfortunately, that did not end up playing out, and the spring did result in a little bit of a move higher. Now, you can clearly see I made the video, I think, about here, and we saw obviously a pullback and a slight move higher. But after that, we sold off very aggressively. We overbalanced time and price, which, if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, is something that is covered over in TIA. So if you're watching this video from anywhere else, you might not understand, but basically, what you could understand is we did end up dropping below the Wyckoff support lines. And once we started seeing 4-hour closes and lower highs, where was that? Over here, you can see we just saw this massive sell-off, followed by closes, lower highs, and then another sell-off. Now, we obviously had this huge run up into a new all-time high, but I was very suspicious of this move for quite a few reasons. Now, I don't know if I've talked about it here before, but I believe I've mentioned this in Discords that I'm in, where if you see Bitcoin trading in a range, and it doesn't really seem like it's going anywhere, and you see one or two select altcoins, which in this case was BNB. If you remember from the last major top, the January top, where we had like all that Trump meme coin BS and all that, we saw, I think it was Solana popping off, whilst every other altcoin was just not really going anywhere, and Bitcoin was going flat. That's one of my favorite major top signals. It doesn't have to be a cycle top, but it's just a local top, which in this case, was like a 4-month top for Bitcoin and most of the crypto space. So I sold out of my BNB around $1,100, and obviously the next week we had this huge move up to $1,300. I felt like an idiot. But looking back at it, I mean, price gave me a chance to get back in cheaper, and we are below my exit price now. But I'm just going to say this publicly for everyone. This has been one of the signals in my experience that has worked out absolutely amazing. So the next time you start to see Bitcoin kind of chopping sideways, but everyone's screaming for higher and higher prices, greed in the market. You get one or two altcoins going parabolic, whilst everything else is kind of going nowhere. Be on red alert. And another thing that I want to mention is when you see Bitcoin holding above its 50-day triangular moving average, like we were up here, like Bitcoin was obviously trading pretty well, but altcoins, so if we line up our day counts, so let's just say between the 4th and let's say 9th of October, you can see altcoins really struggling to hold that 50-day TMA. Here's ADA. Here's CRO. You can see we couldn't get back above that 50-day TMA. BNB was obviously our exception, and you get SUI, where you get a little bit of price action above it, but it just starts closing underneath it. You can see Psy, we had this same price action the first few days of October. Obviously Rune, we got Bonk, we got Render, we got Pepe. I could obviously go through a whole heap more examples, which I'll go through maybe 2 more. You can see Solana was obviously pretty strong. It was holding above the 50-day TMA, but like Bitcoin, it just really wasn't going anywhere. Like we weren't seeing those really strong moves that we were seeing, like back in December, where we'd get like a couple closes above the 50 TMA, and then we get this huge move up. We just weren't seeing anything like that. But yeah, that's one of my personal favorite top signals. And another thing is this Wyckoff distribution pattern here. Now, at the time, these orange lines weren't there. And I did post this over in the TIA Discord right before we nuked on this Trump China tariff thing, that we were starting to get lower highs and we were seeing a bit of weakness underneath the previous support, which in terms of Wyckoff is quite a bad sign. Like this low here at 121,500, like here you can see around the 10th and 11th, 9th, 10th, 11th of October, we were just really, really struggling. And I would count this as a failed retest, this as a second failed retest, so a potential double top if you jump down to like a 1 hour chart or something like that. And once we started breaking down, you know, like $119,000 was probably where we lost this low here of 119.4. It would have probably been my sign to get out, go short. Um, yeah, anywhere from really 121k through to 119k. If you did get in on a long, like potentially somewhere through here, because at the time it did look like a potential reaccumulation pattern. We had huge, you know, we had like a huge long short ratio differential to the short side. I think it was like 47.52. And obviously there was so many reasons that the market should have at least squeezed a little bit more to liquidate some of those shorts, but obviously in this case it didn't. So, you know, if you'd entered at like 124, 125k like I did, this would have been your chance through here to take the L and move on and potentially go short and make back some of those profits. So on a one Bitcoin position, you know, if you had a 124k entry, 119k exit, it's a 5k loss. But if you flip short on 119k, you know, in just the next few hours, you would have had a chance to make, you know, $12,000 profit. And that's on Coinbase. If you were trading leverage on something like Binance or Bybit, where are we? You would have had, you know, a chance to make a $19,000 profit, not just like a $12,000 or $11,000. So this goes to show that, you know, sometimes you just got to take that loss when your analysis doesn't work out. Anyways, so that is our trade recap. I do apologize for not making any videos for the last month. I have been pretty busy with uni and personal stuff, but now I am back, and obviously we do have these two orange diagonal trend lines, which you can see has acted as resistance here, which is kind of where I drew them from, which we managed to flip above briefly. We retested the range lows for a potential triple bottom pattern by the looks of it. But right now, it does look like we are potentially going for a fourth time breakdown of $107,000 on the 2-bar swing chart. Now, we are currently holding support at $108,000, which if you zoom out, lines up with a lot of previous highs, previous lows. So, you know, potentially this could just be another higher low, which I have drawn a little bit of a trend line on this chart over here. But I'm just not really convinced that the low is in, because you can see these two range lines. This isn't the cleanest Wyckoff schematic in my opinion, but it does look like this is almost like a failed upthrust along with our double top here. So considering how much weakness we've seen below $107,000 through this range here, it does make me lean a little bit further towards the distribution side of things. Now, obviously that is the Coinbase chart. If we have a look at the Bybit or Binance charts, and if I flick this over to a 4-hour, you can see it does look a bit better because we are holding above that stopping volume bar or whatever you want to call it. But I'm still not convinced because we are not able to see any signs of strength above the trading range, which is around $113,500. You can see we've briefly came back above it, retested it, failed to see any continued buying pressure, dropped back below it, flipped it as resistance, and now we've flipped it as resistance again. So I'm just really not convinced that the low is in. Now, another reason is we have seen a double rejection of the 50-day TMA from below. Now, generally, this is quite a bad sign. Now, if you have a look through here, we get a rejection from the 50-day TMA, followed by a sell-off, which we've already seen. But when you see another failed move up, it usually leads to another move lower. So in this case, it could be, 101K, 100K, 98K. I don't expect prices to go much lower, but I'm just not really convinced by the price action. Now, if we have a look back at what happened in February, you can see constant rallies up into the 50-day TMA and continuing to fail means that previous low is in quite a lot of danger of being broken. And I won't go and bore you with any more backtesting right now, but one more thing is if you follow Jason and Michael on YouTube, you can see we have seen a 3-day down signal from the all-time high, and we have not been able to see a 3 days up signal. We got 2 days up here, and we closed above the 50-day TMA on 2 days. It looked convincing. I was looking for 3 days up and 3 daily closes above the 50-day TMA. We didn't get that. We had another chance here to get 3 days up, but we have seen a outside bar which resets the count. So we are going to have to see a downswing before we get another chance of a 3 days up signal. And based on that sell-off in the recent session, it just makes me think that we are going to see another leg down into, who knows, could be a higher low, 105K, or lower low, 100K, 98K. But I really want to see this 3 days up signal. Over on the weekly chart, it is not looking great. Now, if I turn off this standard deviation indicator, which I will explain later on what it means, you can clearly see this is something that Jason and Michael have talked about heaps in their recent videos, but all our corrections since the April Trump tariff drama have been only around, 12, 13, 14%, whilst previously, we were seeing 20%, 20%, 20%, corrections. And it just feels like this correction has been too shallow. Now, a 30% correction, a lot of people are saying, would call the end of the bull market, as we would be breaking beneath, a whole heap of macro support. So I am not thinking we're going to get that, simply because we haven't seen this big rally up. When we saw those 30% corrections, we saw 6, 7 straight weeks up of 10K daily candles. We had mini alt seasons. We just haven't seen it this year. The last time we saw something like that was when Trump got elected at the end of last year. So due to the fact that we haven't pushed up as far, I don't think we'll be seeing a 30% correction. But if we do see, a 20% correction similar to what we are seeing through 2023, start of 2024, that would really line up with what happened in April. We would be getting a retest of the 50-week triangular moving average, which is currently at $100,400. So if we, wicked beneath it but closed back above, like we saw a wick down to 98K and we got to close at, 102K, that would almost be an ideal scenario to set us up for another parabolic move up, 74K to 124K. In this case, it might be 98K to 170K. I just feel like something like this is going to happen, and I do have a technical reason to believe in this, because we have gotten 3 red weeks in a row of lower lows on the weekly BX trender. And you can clearly see almost every time we've gotten it, except in January of 2024, which was through here, we have seen lower prices before higher prices. We saw it here in May of 2023, and we had another sell-off into a slightly lower low. When you start to see this signal that's really only failed once, it just makes me feel that, obviously you do get, a failed signal here and there, but even if we don't sell off into 98k, I still feel like we're probably going to sell off into a lower low. And just looking at the candlestick patterns, if I clear these blue things off my chart, you can see in April we saw this massive, massive flush out. Long wick, we closed back above, but we saw another flush out that following week, which is kind of what we've seen here. You know, that flush out of the following week doesn't actually take out the initial flush out low. Everyone thinks the bottom is in. They buy it up, you know, like this week, where we have a wick up, but we end up making a wick down to make a lower low towards the end of the week, which, you know, could be 100k, 101k, 98k. And then we see a rally. Now, I don't think we're going to rally, make another lower low, and then rally again just because of where we are in the cycle. Just, you know, stealing that phrase off Jason. But it just feels to me that where the market sits right now, it just probably is going to go a bit lower before it goes higher. And obviously, what is my invalidation? Because, you know, every theory needs an invalidation level. Well, on the higher term timeframes, I would want to see a higher low close on the weekly BX trender. That is obviously our first sign that the bottom is in, like we saw in April, you know. Buying in at 83k, yeah, you're paying, you know, over a 10% premium of where the actual low was, but, you know, you got this massive, massive run up that made it more than worth your time, 30k per Bitcoin. On the daily time frame, I want to see 3 days up, 3 green triangles, or 3 daily closes above the 50-day TMA, ideally both. On the 4-hour time frame, I want to see signs of strength above at least 112,400, but really I am looking towards that $113,500 level as where I want to be seeing signs of strength. Sorry, 114,000, not 113,500. It's probably closer to around 113,800, 113,900. Obviously, it's going to depend on your exchange a little bit. But yeah, that is pretty much it for me today. Thank you all for watching. And if I do jump into a trade or the markets change, either big breakout or breakdown, I will be updating you. Peace out.